Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 699. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. This week, we feature our interview with Dr. Eric Daimler. Eric and I discussed how AI can unlock the potential for humanity. Dr. Daimler is an authority in artificial intelligence with over 20 years of experience in the field as an entrepreneur, executive, investor, technologist, and policy advisor. Daimler has co-founded 6 technology companies that have done pioneering work in the fields ranging from software systems to statistical arbitrage. Dr. Daimler is the author of the forthcoming book, The Coming Composability, the roadmap for using technology to solve society's biggest problems. Are you ready to talk AI? It's time for the interview. Dr. Eric Daimler, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Eric, let's start with something, I think is actually very hard. You probably think of as very easy. AI, artificial intelligence. What is it? And
it's a great question. I mean, it can sound simple as a question, but I'm really happy to talk about that because it does get so often misinterpreted. And the one reason it gets misinterpreted is, not necessarily because of Hollywood movies talking about this dystopic future, but also because the term's migrated to some extent. It really meant something when I got started about it back about a generation ago. It used to mean something in research, and once the problem got solved, it wasn't no longer AI. That's morphed a bit to now we have an AI office in the White House. Oddly termed because it's not really artificial and it's not intelligence. It's a bad term, but it's what we have. People like talking about it as just augmentation, like it's a calculator next to you, or it's just automation, like it's some factory machine, or my least favorite, it's just statistics, which is actually the most true, but the least helpful. And that really informs how I generally like to talk about it, which is a way that's accessible to people in a way that helps them frame what we're talking about, even if it's a little less accurate for the 99% of us that are not AI researchers day to day. I can think of it as a system that senses, plans, and acts, then learns from the experience. So senses, plans, acts, learns from the experience. That's how I can think of AI that both makes the technical sense and gives me some purchase on having a broader conversation. Then we can break that down with sensing. Sensing can be anything from the air quality sensor I have in my home to the LiDAR I have on top of my automated car that then takes the data that it's collecting from Internet of Things, would be another source of the data, into the planning mechanism, maybe the traditional place you would think of the algorithms would reside inside of an AI. That planning then has to be executed. As the automated car drives down the road to a crosswalk, is that a shadow? Is that a person? Do I stop, slow, or just keep rolling like the latest Tesla automated car iteration? That's an act. So sense, plan, act, and then learn from the experience. How do we get better over time? In the case of automated car, when we see the crosswalk again, now does it look a little bit different? Why you see these cars rolling down crosswalks multiple times a day outside my office a couple times an hour is because they're trying to get different light to hit these surfaces differently and begin to learn the intersection of the crosswalk under different configurations. They're not going to suddenly spontaneously learn Spanish. They learn in a particular context. But sense, plan, act, learn from the experience, I think is a practical way to be thinking about the definition of AI, practical way to discuss it.
In that definition, by the way, my first traffic ticket was what was called a California stop. At least that's what it was called in Memphis, Tennessee. And that was rolling through a stop sign. So the Tesla doing it, hey, they learned from me. Oh, no, I'm kidding. When we're talking about automation or AI in that context, what's more important then? the code, the algorithms, or the data? Or all they obviously they all have to interact. Which one dominates?
There's a rich conversation to be had inside of there because the conflation of the data, and we'll call it the data model, is often where people start to get confused. So if we think of, I in the pre-times, pre-COVID, I used to fly a fair amount, and that would entail a lot of data. Delta Airlines would be the airline I tended to be on, and they would know some things about me. They might know some data such as my age or my height, maybe, or my eye color, whatever. That's data about me. And they might also know where I tend to originate flights, where I tend to fly to. They certainly would know how frequently I fly. Those are data, pieces of data. Then they have the data model, and the data model says, well, what relationship do we have between the frequency of flying and the airports to which Eric's flying that might inform our willingness to give him a first-class upgrade? Right? That's a data model, and that's proprietary to Delta. There's the data about me, which I may not really care about being released, but then there's the data model that the company cares very much about keeping proprietary themselves. That's hard-earned, hard-collected data. The issues often enter the public discourse around the bias that's present in these things, and those are pretty obvious to Intuit, which is we've heard about them. What is the likelihood that someone's going to get upgraded? Well, people that have been upgraded in the past, and they'll have certain characteristics. Think of any of the demographic characteristics they would have. And then what's the likelihood of somebody flying? They'll have certain characteristics. And so if you're in a very small percentage or a smaller, not the dominant percentage of any particular behavior, that you're more likely to have those exceptions be unfavorable to you. There's another type of bias that can be present that my firm is experiencing with a client, which is that presence or absence of data at all. So there's companies right now that are trying to do reporting for ESG, environmentally social good, or whatever it's called. They're trying to report on the degree to which they are being responsible corporate citizens on the planet. Those reports have to take data from somewhere, and what our client has found is that there is a rich amount of data available coming from developed countries, but a dearth of data coming from developing countries. There's an absence of that data, and that impacts then the analysis that can be done about the degree to which we're making a difference in one domain or another. That's another type of bias. That's a bias in the data, but it's not a typical type of bias that we started off this conversation by describing, which is some bias towards the dominant characteristic for a particular domain or particular behavior. So bias can appear both in the data and in the data model. It's important to separate those for a range of decisions.
Those are hard concepts to pull apart. Bias in the data, bias in the data model. Is that one of the reasons it's so hard to have a civil conversation about AI?
Perhaps the reason for not having a civil conversation of AI is that it can get emotional because of the effects. There's a lot of fear about what AI can bring to our world. But I am motivated by also trying to bring a lot of hope to that conversation. The thinking about AI lying at either one of these dichotomies between a Hollywood dystopia or a utopia is a type of lazy thinking. Because really the reality is going to be in between, and it's up to us to determine where in between we will find ourselves, to where it'll be closer, and maybe even in what domains it'll be closer to the utopia. I'm really encouraged about the degree to which we can have AI liberate us from a whole bunch of jobs that we do not want to do, that we find monotonous. Helpful to realize that jobs are automated often because it's work that we don't want to do as human beings. We don't automate the stuff that we enjoy, or it really doesn't keep us from doing work that we enjoy. But we're happy often to have work automated that we don't enjoy. And there's a lot of jobs that have been automated that for which we don't really shed a tear. The bond traders, stock exchange floor traders. Those jobs have mostly been automated away, and we're not really crying about it. Telephone switchboard operators, that's a job that's been automated. Typists used to be a thing. These jobs have become automated. Other jobs will become automated over time, but they're not jobs that people grow up aspiring to do day to day. That's how automation can take place, and that sometimes can be too scary for people. When I was working in Washington, I would get weekly questions from Congress people about the coming apocalypse for long haul truck drivers. What are we going to do? Because that represents a big part of the employment for many of these states. What is little appreciated is that's a terrible job. Even long haul truckers often don't want to do that job because it takes them away from their family and their friends, their social networks for long periods of time. Often you'll find truckers that trade in long haul trucking for short haul trucking so that they can develop these social bonds with more intention. So this is not necessarily something that's bad. And in the short term, it's also interesting to note that job, long haul trucking, is likely to get better before it goes away. What we're doing right now is augmenting the long haul trucking jobs so that we can have drivers on a sort of peloton, not the exercise bike, but a group of trucks that allow these drivers to go out from, say, New York to Kansas City and then back within a day or two, because they're going in a convoy of 3 traveling very close together on a freeway. That makes that job actually more desirable, more interesting, and people are more willing to do it while increasing productivity for everybody along that value chain. But another place that people can get scared about AI is this fear of AI somehow becoming conscious. Nick Bostrom, kind of famous philosopher at Oxford, or at least famous for me, famous in my circles, articulated the existential threat that AI could pose in AI becoming sentient. And these are the views that you often see Elon Musk parroting. He's not having original thoughts about that, but he parrots this excellent philosopher, Nick Bostrom. That's valid. Nick Bostrom, I know him, and he's a smart guy, and the thoughts are all valid. I can say a couple of things about that fear. One is, Nick, if you read his books carefully, he's actually not making a claim of when. He's making a claim of if it happens, then it is over for us as human beings. I would say the general consensus among the academy, people with whom I work, is that this is very unlikely to happen in 20 to 30 years or 100, and maybe never. And the reason is because we don't have enough awareness of what our own intelligence is. Who's looking out these eyes? Who's talking back in the little voice in everybody's head? We don't know what that is. And we often get appropriation, I think the word term is called. We get that backwards often in these virtual realities. So we just don't know. So that's the argument against this potentially ever happening. But what I would say to that is, it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter whether or not we have sentience. We are already beginning to experience the degree to which this is a frightening evolution of this technology anyway. We can be manipulated. And we can be manipulated not as individuals, but also as tribes in a way that can be very dangerous to us in society. The analog that I often think of for myself when I try to temper my reaction to many of these technologies, such as the addictive TikTok, is I think of potato chips. Those darn potato chip companies, they know more about my physiology than I do. Right. So I can't, obviously it's up to me. I have free will in this to some regard about whether or not I'm going to have a second potato chip. But the companies have spent millions of dollars trying to manipulate my physiology towards me being finding difficulty in resisting a second potato chip. And that is finding a digital expression, and that's only going to get worse. So that's a practical expression of the evolution of these intelligent machines that we are well served to attend to.
So is that something that can be regulated? Is that something that some sort of ethical body has to weigh in on?
I think that there are some good conversations, reasonable conversations to be had around the regulation of these machines, and there's some less reasonable conversations to be had. I think the European Union did themselves no favors when they introduced their proposed AI regulation early in 2021. It was really an embarrassment to them in how sweeping their language was, and it's even more embarrassing given the rich sort of resources from the smart people in the EU that were available to give feedback. It really ended up reading like my resume, like it's everything. We're going to regulate everything. And another embarrassment was the city of New York somehow wanting to declare, this is their city council or whatever they call themselves, declare that we needed to disclose if your resume for a job application was submitted to an automated process. It's just insane. The more intelligent conversations around AI and ethics have been put out by a range of bodies that I think could be considered to be reasonable, but tepid. And I am disappointed at many of them because there appears to me some low-hanging fruit to go after some regulation. And I can enumerate a couple of them. The first one is having some circuit breakers. It's just really easy to me. We have 18 million computer programmers in the world. We don't need 18 million in one, but until we put in circuit breakers, those programmers and their project managers and will continue to express their values in this software. And if they can link automation, they will, if that's consistent with their quarterly objectives. We can take a minute and stop some of these automated systems from linking from one to the other from the other, just because they can be linked. As an example, with an automated car rolling down the road, it's completely reasonable for the car to be able to recognize a crosswalk, the car to be able to recognize a shadow, but then it might stop and say, it's time for the driver to intervene. That's an example of a circuit breaker. Hey, human, I need you now to make a decision. It's not just for liability's sake, but like, I'm just not good at this, or I'm 100% sure that there's or 90% sure there's a crosswalk, and I'm 70% sure it's a person. That's too low for me to make a decision on stopping or rolling, right? That's an example of a circuit breaker. We can put circuit breakers in all the time in these linking automation systems. Another one that's similar but distinct is doing audits. And this is important because often these data models, these algorithms, are put into practice without any public declaration of what they were even intended to do. What are you doing? What is this intended to do? Now, it's pretty easy in the case of Google. Look, I want to have more eyeballs on my ads. Fair enough. But in other higher consequence contexts, tell me exactly what that algorithm is intended to do. Tell me how it was going to take an input and tell me how it was going to take an output. You don't need to tell me how. It can be what's called a zero knowledge proof in that way, like a FICO score. Give me an input, give me an output, just tell me what it was expected at the end. That's a sort of audit from experts, preferably, testing what these automated models can do. And those are two ways you might say are slowing down these algorithms, but this produces a big productivity boost. So I think it's completely fair to add a little bit of oversight on these. And I think those are some lower hanging fruit on top of AI. And I'll give you one more, and I got many. But the last one is lineage or provenance of the data. We often see that when we're in our media orbits, the media that we consume, some claim just being made. We know kind of intuitively, but we'll often check less often than we should about the links that may source that data. And some sites are better on this than others that will make a claim, but then allow you to go to the source data and where that's backed up, and you can make your own decisions. I think a third way of beginning to regulate some of these automated systems is to require a type of lineage or data provenance that shows the base level facts upon which these algorithms or the data is built, just for people to be able to double check them, say it's not made up out of thin air. So those are three ways I think we can regulate fantastic learning algorithms.
Is AI the goal, or is the goal something else?
For me, the vision of learning algorithms, artificial intelligence, what have you, is to liberate humans to become more human. Away from this drudgery where we are doing monotonous work that we don't want to do. I think there's a lot of creativity available from these digital tools. To use TikTok again, you find people allowing a creative expression that would have been difficult in not so long ago. I think the future could allow more people inside even big organizations to express their own intelligence, either their native intelligence or their acquired subject matter expertise inside of rules, business rules, that then can be used and reused across organization in patterns that in itself can be duplicated in different contexts. This is the future that I think is available with these powerful digital tools. And that's what I'd say is the point. You have AI as augmentation, that's true. Automation, that's true. And it can liberate us from doing a little bit like what a calculator does today, liberate us from doing long division. I like that. I want more of those things to be automated away from me.
Oh, come on. I still remember the day I learned how to do partial differential equations. That was the second best day of my life, which irritates my wife to no end because, getting married, having children probably should have been higher up. But nevertheless, if you were someone in the programming world or in the data processing world starting out today, how would you think that their world will be different because of the organizations, governments embracing and leveraging AI?
This is easy. I am fortunate enough to have spent 20 plus years in and around AI. It's funny to say about how long I've spent as a researcher, as a venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road, as an entrepreneur, and then most recently in policy in the U.S. Federal government. But in the White House, I saw the limitations on AI, and I might like to say I saw the future. I saw the future from that perspective. The future is going to come from not necessarily these super fancy, sexy algorithms that you often see get the press from neural networks, and deep mind, deep learning is often entered the public lexicon. The new order is emerging right now from the coming compositionality. That compositionality is enabled by this branch of mathematics called categorical algebra. It's an extension, you might think of it as an extension of graph theory. It's kind of related to type theory, but this math, categorical algebra, category theory, this is the math of the 21st century. You might think the more math, the better, but for my kids, I would be replacing trigonometry and geometry and even calculus, many people will be happy to know, with category theory and probability statistics. Category theory is a sort of digital math, where calculus is a sort of math of continuity, good for machines, still good for mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, but really less applicable. Calculus is really going to become the Latin of the 21st century. It still exists, but much less relevant. I think category theory and compositionality are the terms with which people are going to want to become familiar, educate themselves, and apply into the careers of the future.
Eric, this has been fantastic. If you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you a magic wand and a cup of your caffeinated beverage of choice and two wishes that you could change anything, any way people perceive and use AI, what would those two things be and why?
I can think of one just reflexively, which is a comfort with basic mathematics, or kind of thinking with these mathematical concepts with more alacrity. That serves people really well. just to think in these abstract notions. I was given an example recently when I saw somebody with struggle with fractions while they were cooking. Take 3/4 cup and then take 2/3 cup, right? You can multiply those and get a half a cup. But this person just became befuddled with these fractions and just laid stuff out on the counter and made approximations, chopping things on a counter. I think that's what most people find is their experience with math. Many people find their experience with math. So I'd like people to get a comfort with math. I actually don't think it comes from talent. I think some baseline level of functionality actually just comes from struggling with it. Not higher levels, these things, some of which we discussed, but the basic familiarity. And then the second thing is related, but it's distinct from that, which is thinking through a formal way of your wishes. What do you want to have happen? So going back to where we started, which is an automated car approaching a crosswalk, tell me exactly how you want that car to approach the crosswalk. As it gets closer, how fast would you like it to go once it recognizes a crosswalk? Under what circumstances, day or night? How comfortable does the system need to feel that it is in recognizing an image? Then what? These are the sort of things that we all need to be comfortable articulating with a very clear understanding of outcomes. Often engineers, lawyers, accountants are trained to have that level of discipline in their thinking. And I am encouraged by the place that people studying liberal arts can be expressing often the empathy and communication that will find value in this world. They can come together by teaching each other how to articulate exactly what they want to have happen in a particular circumstance. That will find its way into computer code in the next decade in a wider range of circumstances. And that skill is going to be one to nurture as individuals and in teams.
Dr. Eric Daimler, CEO of Connexus, I want to thank you for spending time with the Software, Process, and Measurement Cast listeners. As you probably know, at this point, I opened up the platform. How could people continue the conversation? And after that, the platform's open for you to promote anything that you'd like.
My firm is at connexus.com. That also finds its way onto the social media platforms. I'm on Twitter at EAD and on LinkedIn. It's probably three good places to reach out.
Super. Anything that you'd like to promote?
I have a book on the coming compositionality that will be coming out next year. That really intends to be a book for everybody to be reading about a roadmap for their careers and how to have this conversation as citizens. And so I hope to have more and more people part of the discussion about bringing AI into the world in a way that fulfills on the promise of the technology and brings us a little bit closer to the utopia that we all hope for.
Here's hoping for that utopia. When it's time for the book, let me know and we can promote it on the podcast.
Thank you.
Dr. Daimler, thank you again for spending time with the Software, Process, and Measurement Cast listeners. I can guarantee you they will eat this up. Thank you again.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
In Reread Saturday News, multitasking is the first or second biggest lie in the modern business world. The best description of multitasking would include thrash, waste, hubris. The problem is that everyone thinks they're special and can multitask their way to effective delivery of value. Chapter 3 of Why Limit WIP, We Are Drowning in Work, blasts away at multitasking. Remember, order a copy and read along, link in the show notes. Don't order while you're doing something else. In upcoming events, final call for the free webinar, When Prioritization Goes Bad, April 19th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time through 12:30 Eastern Time. Link in the show notes. We're doing this webinar for the Great IT Pro. Great organization, great amount of content and information. Check it out. Next week, for SPaMCAST 700, we will feature an interview with Slater Victorov. Slater presents an alternative definition to AI than Dr. Daimler this week. Compare and contrast? If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?